All right, good afternoon. I will start off with an update on Libya. Our colleagues on the ground tell us that hostilities in Tripoli continue to impact health facilities and health personnel. There have been at least 4 fatalities among health workers since the beginning of this current conflict, and 11 ambulances have to date been damaged or destroyed as a result of the hostilities. The armed clashes, random shelling, and explosives placed on roads are hampering the ability of humanitarian workers to evacuate civilians and to deliver needed aid, as well as the ability of civilians to move freely to safer areas or to be able to access vital goods and services. We are also continue to remind all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law to take constant care to spare civilians and civilian infrastructure, including medical personnel and medical or health facilities. Since the beginning of the conflict, 102 civilian casualties have been verified, including 23 fatalities, and over 45,000 people have now fled their homes due to the clashes, and that's according to the UN Migration Agency. Turning to Africa and an update on Cyclone Kenneth, humanitarian colleagues are telling us that in Mozambique, at least 41 people have been killed and more than 37,700 houses have been either totally destroyed or partially destroyed. Humanitarian partners have supplied shelter material, including tarpaulins, family kits, tents, and hygiene, as well as water sanitation to families in need. The World Food Program has provided for over 14,600 people, and yesterday a team including 2 medics were deployed to Mutemo Island and in Ibo District with emergency health and water and sanitation as well as hygiene supplies. And in Comoros, the UN's humanitarian arm says that 7 people have died and over 200 people were wounded following the storm. Almost 80% of farms and over 60% of crops have reportedly been destroyed. And the cyclone has also reportedly destroyed over 3,800 houses, including 400 schools. The United Nations has deployed team members to assist the government of the Comoros in rapid assessment and response, and emergency supplies are in place for the health, education, nutrition, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And in Malawi, we and our partners have now reached over 400,000 people who were impacted by Cyclone Idai. The UN has provided immediate life-saving relief support, including food, medicine, shelter, protection services, water, sanitation, and hygiene supplies. Beyond addressing the immediate needs, the United Nations is also supporting the government to assess post-disaster recovery needs that will inform early and long-term recovery efforts. This includes providing support for people who were displaced by the cyclone and wish to return home. More information online. And in Somalia, 1.7 million people are expected to face crisis or emergency level of food insecurity until June. That represents a 10% increase in food insecurity, following a second consecutive failed rainy season that has led to livestock losses and widespread crop failure. Malnutrition rates are rapidly escalating due to the drought conditions, and 954,000 children are anticipated to be acutely malnourished, and that's including 174,600 children who are severely malnourished. The humanitarian country team is preparing a drought response plan to address food gaps in the most severely affected areas and to prepare for substantial increase in needs between May and October. So far, Somalia's 2019 humanitarian response plan, which is seeking $1.08 billion, is only 19% funded. Insufficient funding has led to the scaling back of water, sanitation, and hygiene activities despite serious water shortages across the country. And the World Health Organization tells us that most Ebola response activities, including community engagement, vaccination, and case investigation, have now been relaunched in Butembo in the North Kivu province of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This follows a slowdown caused by the attack that left a Cameroonian doctor, Dr. Muzuko, dead and 2 people injured. As I mentioned on Monday, the Director General of WHO visited the DRC this week. In Butembo, he expressed gratitude to the WHO and partners and assessed the next steps needed to strengthen both security and the government-led Ebola response. Only $83 million has been received under the strategic response plan out of a total requirement of $148 million. And turning to Myanmar, the acting UN resident humanitarian coordinator in Myanmar, Knut Oatsby, welcomed the announcement by the Office of the Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Services of a ceasefire extension in Myanmar from 1st of May to 30 June. Mr. Ostby expressed the hope that the ceasefire extension will further strengthen the prospects for Myanmar's peace process. The UN in Myanmar is prepared to work with the relevant parties on providing urgent humanitarian assistance to all people in need in the affected areas. And the High Representative of the UN Alliance of Civilization, Miguel Angel Moratinos, visited Colombo in Sri Lanka. Yesterday, he paid his respects to the people and government of Sri Lanka and expressed the support of the UN for the government's efforts in its fight against terrorism and countering violent extremism. This was the first visit by any high-level UN official to Sri Lanka since the terrorist attack on Easter Sunday. The High Representative conveyed the Secretary-General's condolences and solidarity to President Sirisena, and he told him, "You are not alone." He also met with the Prime Minister Wickramasinghe, with whom he exchanged the views on the current efforts undertaken to restore unity and peaceful coexistence in the society. And he also met with the leader of the opposition. And you will have seen yesterday, Geir Peterson briefed the Security Council in the afternoon on Syria, on what he's told council member he's doing everything he can to move forward on rebuilding trust and confidence, opening the door to a political process in Geneva between the Syrian government and the opposition. And as if you needed to be reminded, Friday is World Press Freedom Day. In a message to mark the day, the Secretary-General says that a free press is essential for peace, justice, sustainable development, and human rights. This is especially true during election seasons, the focus of this year's day. He says that He says that facts, not falsehoods, should guide people as they choose their representatives. The Secretary-General is deeply troubled by the growing number of attacks and the culture of impunity, noting that UNESCO says almost 100 journalists were killed in 2018, while hundreds were imprisoned. And his full message is available in a press release and also out on a video on YouTube and on our various UN platforms. On Friday, UNESCO and the Department of Global Communications will be celebrating World Press Freedom Day with a high-level event and panel discussion that will take place at Conference Room 1 at 10 a.m. The theme assigned this year is Media for Democracy, Journalism, and Elections in Times of Disinformation. Should be an interesting discussion. Also, another event I wanted to flag to you, this one tomorrow. You're all invited to attend the premiere of a film based on the rediscovered diary of a young Polish Jewish girl who recounts life in Poland under the occupation of the Nazis. Screening the film Broken Dreams, directed by Tomasz Majewski, is followed by a discussion with the director and Miss Ariana Belak, a Holocaust survivor herself and the sister of the diarist, and that's from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. in ECOSOC Chamber. It will be Undersecretary General for Global Communications, Alison Smale, will moderate. The Deputy Permanent Representative of Poland, Paweł Radomski, will also deliver remarks. And at 3 p.m. today, as you have been told, there will be a press briefing by Ambassador Dian Jani, the Permanent Representative of Indonesia, President of the Security Council for the month of May. And tomorrow, 1 p.m., there will be a press briefing sponsored by the Permanent Mission of Georgia to the United Nations, entitled A Vision for Modernizing the Fight Against Hunger. Speakers will be the Ambassador Imnadje, the Permanent Representative of Georgia to the UN, and Dr. David Kiervalidze, Georgia's candidate for Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Ms. Lederer.
Thank you, Steph. Can you give us an update on any contacts that the Secretary General has had regarding Venezuela and the current crisis?
Secretary General had a conversation with the Foreign Minister of Venezuela last night. And we've also reached out to people working with the President of the National Assembly. Go ahead, sorry.
Yes, I wonder if he had any response to the criticism by Venezuela's ambassador of his neutral position, what he called.
We're continuing to be concerned about the reports of people wounded, and including one dead as a result of yesterday's events in Caracas. The Secretary General and all of us here at the UN are following closely today's demonstrations that are taking place, and the Secretary General reiterates his call to all sides to exercise maximum restraint and warn against the use of lethal force against peaceful demonstrators. I answered it to the best of my ability. I think. Listen, we heard. I didn't think you were listening. Yeah, but thank you for advocating for Edie. Yes, sorry. I don't mean to laugh because it's indeed a serious matter. No, we've heard what the. I heard what the ambassador said yesterday. Our position is what it is. Our concern is with the people of Venezuela, and our concern is to try to help find a political solution out of this current crisis. Yes, ma'am.
You're mentioning a political solution. How do you think the United Nations could be a tool or a medium to be able to get there when we have heard from the opposition that is not a possibility of dialogue by the Guaido people? The president of Venezuela has said he's willing, according to what Ambassador Moncada said yesterday, but the United States today, during a press interview through their State Department Secretary Mike Pompeo, said that they're willing to do military action in Venezuela, and just the interim Secretary of Defense canceled a trip because they're going to analyze the situation in Venezuela. I'm not saying they're going to act. However, all these items, how it fits into a possible plan to be able to get to
I'm not privy to anybody else's plans. For the Secretary General, for us, there needs to be a political solution. The Secretary General's good offices remain available if both sides should choose to accept it. That has been his position since the beginning, and I think that's why he, a few weeks ago, I think explained to you guys directly why we were not directly involved in any of the different groups of friends. While we support in general all of these different political initiatives, that he wants to remain available to both sides, and that continues to be his position. Let's go to India, Pakistan, as I expect the question to be.
Yes.
Thank you, Yoshita. Sorry, go ahead.
The UN Security Council today designated Masood Azhar as a global terrorist. His Jaish-e-Mohammed were responsible for the Pulwama terror attacks. It's been 10 years in the making, this designation. What is the response of the Secretary General on this? It's been perceived as a big victory in the fight against terrorism.
I mean, it's not for the Secretary General to respond. This is the work of a well-established mechanism through the Sanctions Committee of the Security Council. It is a big part of the United Nations work in the fight against terrorism. And I think a matter of principle, first of all, it's always good when all member states of the Security Council agree on something. And we would, of course, hope that all member states abide by those decisions. Errol.
Thank you, Steph. Since all of us obviously are very much interested to see your real position on the Venezuela, the Secretary General, let me try this way. On Libya,
I have delivered the real position, but I'm always willing to put a little mustard on this pitch.
Okay, it's a pitch indeed. All right. On Libya, you was criticized as well that you took the side of the government the government in Tripoli, while other countries changed in the meantime, supporting General Haftar. Now, how come that you really have to balance that much and you cannot recognize more, but with the words of wisdom even the position of the opposition in Venezuela and give some advice at least or so?
Sounds like a great question for a panel discussion. But I'm not going to engage in the compare and contrast. I think the situation in Tripoli and Caracas are completely different. And again, I'm not sure how to answer your question with any words that I haven't yet used. Linda.
Going back to your favorite subject.
So many.
Well, the dominant subject today. Anyway, regarding Venezuela, you mentioned that the SG had a conversation with the foreign minister and that the office was reaching out to some people working with the National Assembly. So my question is, how is he reaching out, or how is the Secretary General's office reaching out to members of the National Assembly? Does that include Mr. Guaido? And have National Assembly representatives been in contact with the SG in any frequent manner?
No, not directly with the Secretary General, since Mr. Guaido wrote to the Secretary General, and the Secretary General wrote back to him. Other contacts are being had at different levels, either at headquarters or in the country office. But there's nothing more for me to report on the outcome of these contacts. Maggie.
Steph, the Taliban spokesman said that the Taliban the delegation met with Mr. Yamamoto, the SRSG of UNAMA in Doha. Do you have any sort of readout? Because the Taliban guy is saying that Mr. Yamamoto welcomed the cut in civilian casualties, the decrease in civilian casualties, but last year's numbers were the highest. So I'm not quite sure what this year's numbers are.
Let me see if I can get something from our colleagues there. Ipsilon.
I have first a follow-up on Venezuela. So, just to clarify, are you still standing by your comments yesterday?
I'm not. Yeah, I haven't. I'm not going back and changing the record.
No, but you still.
No, take that answer as you will.
Okay, so my other question is Omar Shaker is an Israel-Palestine director at Human Rights Watch. And the Israeli authorities, they want to deport him. Any comments on that?
Let me take a look. Let me take a look at this case, and I'll try to give you some language. Betul.
Thank you, Steph. Does the UN know how many foreign fighters are being held by SDF in Syria, and what is the SDF's position?
I don't have the number off the top of my head. It doesn't mean that someone else in this building doesn't have those numbers on top of their heads. There is a Security Council resolution that deals with the issue of foreign fighters, which we would hope member states follow through on. There are also, obviously, the issue of foreign fighters needs to be dealt with within a human rights context of people's rights being respected, and also, of course, within the context of accountability for the crimes that may have been committed. Carla, and then Zach.
Thank you, Stéphane. Has the Secretary General made any comment about Jeffrey Sachs's brilliant report on economic sanctions as collective punishment against the Venezuelan people? And if not, why not? And again, what is the UN's position on one government attempting to change another government by starving out its people?
I'm not aware. In fact, I would be aware if he had made a comment on this report. He has not. On his position on the use of sanctions, I would refer you to remarks he delivered in the Security Council in the second half of last year, which I think clearly outlines his position. Zach.
Hi, just looking for any comment you may have, or because I've been waiting for this for about a month now, any comment that the Secretary General has on the case of Mustafa Qasim, the New York resident and Egyptian national who was convicted in 2013 and also sentenced to 15 years in prison in 2018. One of the issues is, of course, his health. Apparently it's really deteriorating because he's on a hunger strike.
In detention in
In Cairo.
In
Egypt.
Cairo.
Mhm.
I don't have anything here, but I will get you something. Mario.
Do you have any comment on the situation of Mr. Polo Lopez, the opposition leader in Venezuela that was freed from home arrest yesterday and is now at the Spanish?
Yes, I understood he was freed. I saw the press reports that that I think he had sought asylum, I think, in one or another embassy. I think it's important that people be free to go about peacefully demonstrating, and then nothing be done to make the political process more complicated. Yes, ma'am.
Months ago, the Federica Mogherini spoke about the possibility of working with the Secretary General in a humanitarian assistance for Venezuela. Do you have any information about a progress and the possibility of advancing and a plan to try to have that humanitarian assistance?
I mean, all I know is the upscaling that we've done, WHO through PAHO and UNICEF, but I will look into the EU issue. Errol.
Thanks, Steph. Since you mentioned and you offered on behalf of the Secretary General strong words, the words on the human rights and freedom of the press, is the Secretary General going to do anything more that he has done already on the case of Mr. Khashoggi, late Khashoggi, because not of the culprits so far is not punished?
I think the Secretary General expressed very clearly his desire for this, for the death of Mr. Khashoggi to be fully investigated and those responsible to be brought to account. And that position has not changed. See you Thursday, tomorrow. You may now leave. The Mass is over.